In today's video, we're going to be going over the upcoming pattern as we always do here, but we're also going to be taking a massive look at the newly formed tropical storm Helen or Helene. I don't know which one it is, Ellen or Helene, something like that. We are going to be discussing this storm. There is some opportunity for good news. It's not guaranteed yet, but could hinder development a little bit here. So we're going to be discussing that later on. But if that good news does not take place, we are still likely looking at a category 3, 4, or maybe even 5 storm impacting probably the state of Florida, but still, again, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, even Georgia, as this storm moves inland, needs to be watched very, very closely. So let's dive into things, take a look here at the upcoming pattern. And by the time we're reaching this afternoon, you can see that there is some rainfall in the eastern states. We've seen this low that we've been predicting kind of taking off across a lot of your Ohio Valley and Midwest. We see a little bit of a warm front look here on the eastern side of things and a cold front look behind it. So that is kind of the dynamic at play here. Overall, the West is just very quiet, so not a lot to discuss there. As we take a look at tomorrow afternoon on Wednesday, the storminess kind of just continues. We see Ellen, I guess I'm just going to call it Helen, I guess we'll go with, here to the north of the Yucatan Peninsula, just narrowly to the north, and that's kind of that opportunity for good news that we're discussing. And it seems strange to call a landfall good news, but this storm is a tropical storm, maybe a category 1 by this point, so it wouldn't be as devastating as that potential category 3, 4, or 5 would be for Florida, obviously. So it would overall be good news, and this actually would pay dividends down the road as far as hindering the development. So we're going to be discussing that big time today. Keep in mind that there's still a really good chance that it misses the Yucatan Peninsula altogether, and we see just kind of like an open season development here where it just has a free reign to develop as much as possible. Again, the east, we see this storminess continuing, and also a little bit of the Pacific Northwest, but overall most of the west is very warm and quiet. Your jet stream looks about like this, kind of that trough that we've been projecting for weeks now is in place by the time we're reaching Wednesday, so some cooler air, more seasonal air able to make its way in here to the east, and much warmer than normal for the west overall is going to be the trend there. By the time we reach Thursday here on September 26th, this is the afternoon, we do see a 977 millibar low pressure center right near the Big Bend of Florida here, where we do expect impact. By the way, for you Florida folks, we are going to be diving into the impacts in today's video. Total rainfall, storm surge are going to be big points of discussion here towards the end. So we are going to be taking a deeper dive into what this storm could mean as far as the current projections are concerned. This is a relatively strong storm at this point. It's hard to say the exact intensity that this European model is calling for, but likely at least a category 2 by this point, maybe even category 3 would be a pretty good estimate. And then we see overnight Thursday into Friday, this does go ahead and strike that Big Bend of Florida. Now, as we know, the tropical storms kind of rotate in this counterclockwise motion, so these areas on the southern and eastern side actually will be getting the greatest impacts as far as storm surge is concerned. So we're going to be really discussing that. Obviously, areas where the storm hits directly are the very worst, but you know, obviously if you're on the southeastern side, you're getting it worse than the western side of this storm. Heavy precipitation, obviously, we're looking at potentially 10 inches plus in here. Luckily, it's a quick mover, so we don't see this one just kind of sitting around. It actually moves through very quickly, so the rainfall is going to come and go instead of just sitting overhead, which is one piece of good news about what this storm looks to be like. And as you can see, it moves off very quickly by Friday afternoon all the way near Kentucky and Tennessee, creating a lot of rainfall here to areas across some of your central states, kind of the Ohio Valley down through the deep south, and then some of the mid-Atlantic and southeast here by the time we're reaching Friday afternoon. Saturday afternoon here, this storm quickly dissipates, and what we're left with is a very quiet pattern around the nation. As you can see, there is this remnant system here over kind of the Midwest. We're seeing some rainfall showers in there, but really quiet and a really stagnant jet stream. It's really just moving straight zonal, which would be from west to east, which, believe it or not, you would think that's average, but that's actually not very common. We do see it from time to time, but not the most, you know, it's not kind of like the baseline jet stream. It's actually a little more rare than other patterns. We do see that there is overall sporadic showers located for a lot of the eastern states, but again, nothing to write home about. Overall, we will see likely above average activity here, but It's coming over the course of many days of kind of just dreary, drizzly weather. There is some heavier rain in there at times, but not all the time here. We do see a strong low taking place across Canada, kind of on the southwestern corridor of the Hudson Bay. We do see a cold front wanting to develop here, a warm front up to the north, and maybe some sort of occlusion happening there out west. And we do see this Arctic air wanting to dive southward. Again, this is the 30th, and we do see this nice surge of warmth here to the west. This could spell a big cool down for parts of the east, and by the time we're reaching Tuesday afternoon, which will be October 1st, by the way, a week from today, we do see this overall storminess really trending for a lot of the east here. Cooler weather diving southward here into the east, and overall a surge of warmth out west is the overall trend here. And by the time we reach the 2nd, we have this full-blown cool down here for a lot of the east, and particularly the northern areas, so the Midwest, Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, and Northeast. I don't know if this one stretches quite far enough southward to impact those very far south areas. Meanwhile, this ridge is kind of becoming a little flat. It's not straight south to north. It's kind of stretching eastward, so we could see what this pattern does. It could warm up, and sure enough, it does by Thursday on the 3rd. And Friday the 4th, we're back to kind of a warmer pattern in the east, but very quiet for a lot of the nation here. The GFS model, let's just dive into Helen here, and we see this storm rapidly intensifying. Again, it's already a tropical storm. We see it very close to that northern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula here, just as we mentioned. A lot of these 12Z model runs here today on September 24th are trending in this direction. So we do see this taking place. It does obviously intensify very quickly once it reaches the Gulf. There's a lot of heat potential in here. Overall, very, very conductive for tropical development, and we do see this one really rapidly develop down to a 975 millibar low pressure center before again striking that Big Bend of Florida. Again, this would likely be category 2, maybe 3 with that current projection. Sometimes these lower resolution models don't have as good of a handle on it. Let's take a look at the current satellite imagery. Your low pressure center is somewhere in here. So the next few hours, I would say the next 6 to 8 hours are crucial. Is it going to kind of meander north, or is it going to really stay more at like a northwesterly trajectory? And that's a big difference here, because we either have the low over the Yucatan Peninsula or again in this sweet spot, depending on that difference. So the next couple of hours really, really dictate what's going to occur here. We do see a nice area of development here on the western side and the eastern side. Usually you get these 2 columns of clouds just like this, and then we start to get kind of that rotation going between these, and then that's when you would get the full circle. So I do expect that we will have a hurricane by the time we're looking at it somewhere in here. That is when that would likely be happening. A little bit quicker if it doesn't interact with that Yucatan Peninsula. Again, development will not be as stunted, but if it moves over the Yucatan Peninsula, it might become a hurricane a little bit after crossing back into the Gulf would be my expectations. But overall, this looks like a very healthy storm, and I do expect that as long as this one doesn't have too much land interaction, we will see a hurricane relatively soon. Category 1, of course. Here is the overall 7-day graphical tropical weather outlook, and again, Helen there over the Southern Caribbean. We do see that there is a 80% chance of development out here in the middle of the Atlantic over the next 7 days, 40% over the next 48 hours, and this likely will be our next storm to discuss. Of course, people aren't going to be as concerned about this one as it's way out there in the middle of the water. Helen is going to be the main concern here at this point. As we take a look at the cone forecast for Tropical Storm Helen, we do see it currently has 45 mile per hour sustained wind, so about 6 above your tropical storm status. It has quite a way to go, 74 miles per hour before it becomes a hurricane, so it does need to develop quite quickly before reaching that point. But as you can see, by 8 a.m. tomorrow, the National Hurricane Center does have this one at hurricane status. That is going to be very close to the Yucatan Peninsula, but the cone, if it hits kind of just a little further east than projected, would go straight through that sweet spot. It becomes a major hurricane 24 hours after that at 8 a.m. on Thursday. And there could be some intensification between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. on Thursday. So that's where the potential for, category 3, 4, maybe even 5 is still there, as it remains at hurricane or major hurricane status quite long there, about 12 hours, which is enough time for that to pick up quite a bit of steam. In recent years, we've seen storms really intensify as they approach the coast. Historically, they would weaken as they get pretty close. But we've seen storms reach their peak right basically at landfall, which is absolutely insane. Hopefully this one doesn't follow that trend, but that's what kind of leads me to believe that there could be further development as it approaches that coast of Florida. So it is important to stay informed. As our model showed earlier, this one does head towards eventually northern Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, maybe even heading into the Midwest there like Indiana or Illinois as a post-tropical cyclone. Again, kind of just a rainmaker for them up north, maybe a little bit of wind. Let's take a look at these hurricane models that we looked at yesterday. We're going to see some of this Yucatan Peninsula interaction. First off, this is the one that showed the historic 200+ mile per hour storm yesterday. We get the low pressure center over the Yucatan Peninsula right here. So again, big difference between these two tracks. And currently we have this one heading over the Yucatan Peninsula, which stunts the growth on this particular model. So let's kind of just track it closely. It does intensify, you know, past 75 just to the north of the Yucatan Peninsula there. Kind of strikes as maybe a hurricane, but weakens back to a tropical storm before really quickly becoming a hurricane again. We do see further intensification, of course, and look at the eastern side of this storm like I mentioned. We actually have stronger winds here on the east side as well, heading towards the Tampa Bay area, which I'm especially concerned about. We're going to be discussing that a little bit later on with the storm surge, but a lot of these winds are to the east of that eye wall at this point, as we have 89 mile per hour winds. This is likely category 1, maybe 2 status here, right in between, and it's headed northward. So let's see if we get further intensification. We do get 95 miles per hour, which would be a higher end category 2 at landfall. So we see that significant stunted growth from the Yucatan Peninsula interaction. Here is that sister model of this one. These are all based on the GFS model, by the way, not to get confusing, but they're all kind of in that family. We do really quickly get 95 mile per hour, 100 mile per hour winds here, and even 113 before landfall. And 113 would put us just narrowly at category 3 status before striking. Again, these are low-end projections at this point. This is with the stunted growth of that Yucatan Peninsula. We're getting a category 2 or 3 according to a lot of this model guidance. So still a lot of development takes place. Let's take a look at a couple here that don't show that stunted growth, that don't hit the Yucatan Peninsula. And we see this one develop straight up into hurricane status right as it goes through that sweet spot, but it does go through the sweet spot. Again, that low pressure center is right here versus the previous model, which showed it, you know, 50 miles further west onshore of the Yucatan Peninsula. And we get a big difference here. So 70 straight up to 76, 87. So it's rapidly developing here. 89, 88, 110. So again, we're into category 3 status here. 130 here. We're like 0.3 miles per hour away from category 4 there. Here is a category 4. Still by Thursday morning, 142, 129, 145. So it hits a peak of 145 miles per hour, which is about 10 under category 5 status. So look at the difference. We're getting category 5 almost or category 4 almost category 5 here when it misses the Yucatan Peninsula, but the ones that are hitting it, it's a category 2 or 3. That's that low end projection like I mentioned. Let's take a look at this next one as well that also misses the Yucatan Peninsula. A little closer this time on this one, but it does not go over. And again, rapidly intensifying 72, 85, 95, 112, 108, 119, 121, 125 here. So we get a little bit of that land interaction. We end up at about a category 3 striking the Big Bend here with a little bit of land interaction. So there's a big difference. I would say if we go straight over the Yucatan Peninsula, there's a much better chance of seeing that kind of lower end category 2. If there's a little bit of interaction, you're looking at more of a category 3. And then if there's none, that's going to give us the best chance for the worst case scenario, unfortunately, of category 4 or 5 storm striking into Florida. Now, the current spaghetti model guidance, which is from 12Z, like I mentioned, shows basically none of these showing the Yucatan Peninsula hit. They all stay well to the east of it. They're very tight in here, which is good news. And the majority here showing kind of that northwestern end of the Big Bend seeing the strike. So somewhere in there getting that landfall just a couple of days from now. The intensity guidance has been increasing every single run. Here's the category 1 mark. Almost every single model crossing over this. We have a couple that show no further development, and we're going to disregard these. This is clearly not going to be the case. We are going to count these as severe outliers and really not count them in the mean average at all, to be honest. Category 2 is where almost every model goes that is showing intensification from this point, which is almost a certainty. And then about half of those crosses over category 3 status, and another chunk of them, I'd say about 10 to 25% of these models that are at least reasonable, are showing category 4 status. Currently, the good news is we don't have any of these model outputs showing a category 5. It's hard to count that as good news because a category 3 or 4, you're not going to get hit by a hurricane and be like, oh, thank God that wasn't a category 5. It was only a category 4. No, it's really going to be devastating either way, and you wouldn't likely feel the difference. You're not going to be thinking like, oh, I'm so thankful it was only a category 4. You're not really going to be able to tell. So definitely devastating in this territory regardless. Let's talk a little bit about these impacts quickly. And here is the storm surge. It's a little bit of an interactive experimental one, but it is from the National Hurricane Center, so keep this in mind. And this is the potential storm surge flooding above land. So you know, if you see these colors here, blue is 1 foot above ground, yellow is 3 feet above ground, orange is 6 feet above ground, and red is 9 feet above ground. So we're going to take a look at a couple regions here real quickly. And first off, we see areas in the Big Bend and the northern end of the Big Bend. I mean, we're seeing severe storm surge here. A lot of areas under 9 feet above ground of water. Likely these areas are less populated, thankfully, as these areas are historically very prone to flooding, but we do have some populated areas seeing the 3 feet above ground or 6 feet above ground. Very bad news. Now, it only gets more concerning as we head southward. A lot of these areas seeing further inland with that 9 feet above ground. Same story as we head further south. And we're going to head towards the Tampa Bay over time here. Timber Pines, you know, very close. Hudson, Florida there, under 6 to 9 feet of water. Tarpon Springs, you know, you're looking at 3 to 6 feet, mostly, some areas of 9. But as we head towards this Tampa Bay area, look at this. Absolutely terrible. I've been to this area, and there is streets everywhere. There is no woods, really, on the coastline here. So these are all populated areas, especially the beaches here. All of the beaches here, like Clearwater and surrounding areas, are 6 to 9 feet underwater according to this current projection. A lot of downtown St. Petersburg, especially near the coast, you're looking at 6 to 9 feet. And areas to the north of there, like Feather Sound, I don't remember, Pinellas Park, kind of the areas to the east of Pinellas Park here near the bay side, you're looking at a widespread 6 feet above ground, even 9 feet above ground in a lot of those red areas. As we head towards Tampa, look at the downtown Tampa area. A lot of areas under 6 to 9 feet of water. So the reason that I'm pulling this up is because a lot of people think, you know, this storm isn't hitting Tampa, so we're safe. But being on that eastern end, the storm is relatively close, and if it were to, God forbid, trend further eastward, the impacts would only get worse. Looking historically, especially recently, Tampa in particular, the Tampa Bay area has gotten really, really lucky, storm after storm after storm. And unfortunately, this one looks to be a pretty bad one for them. It's a very low-lying area. And unfortunately, I think that is maybe going to be the area that sees some of the worst impacts, especially considering it's completely out of the path at this point. To see these kind of impacts to this severity outside of the storm is just absolutely crazy. Let's take a look here at the total rainfall. The Tampa Bay area, we'll start with that. 4 to 6 inches of rainfall, mostly along the entire west coast of Florida there. More closer to the impact area, we have this lighter orange. That's going to be 6 to 8 inches. And then the darker orange there is 8 to 12. So again, pretty close to 10 would be a mean average there for a lot of these areas, almost directly where the storm is expected to go. Areas very close to the Smoky Mountains here in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, including almost Atlanta, are in that 8 to 12, and there's even some reds popping up, which would be 12 to 16. As you know, elevated areas with a lot of rivers and valleys, heavy rainfall like this does not bode well, so keep that in mind. Back to the Tampa topic. This is a projection. This is unverified. I saw this on a weather group, and, you know, it's from a reputable person, in my opinion, but take it with a grain of salt. But apparently this is what the Tampa Bay Riverwalk would look like with 3 to 5 feet of storm surge. But keep in mind, we're seeing some projections over 6 feet, you know, even over 9 feet. So this would be even worse than this in that case. If it backs down to 3 to 5, this is still what it would look like. So again, they've gotten very lucky. you know, they've dodged bullets, but this one in particular, the storm doesn't even have to hit them directly. They're just on that eastern side where the winds are surging towards the coast, bringing that water inland. This could get very bad for these areas, unfortunately, is really, really a concern of mine. Here's the peak storm surge forecast. You know, this isn't that kind of experimental one. This is just the peak storm surge. In the blues, up to 3 feet. The yellows are going to be up to 6 feet, so we're seeing a lot of that for further south along that Florida coast. Even the Florida Keys getting 1 to 3 feet of storm surge from this storm, so this is really impacting that entire western coastline of Florida almost. We do see up to 9 feet in the oranges, so we see the Tampa Bay area in there again. 5 to 8 is the current projection. Very, very bad news. Above that last graphic I showed you, so more water than even what that would be representing. 6 to 10 in the reds here, unfortunately, for a lot of these areas. And along that Big Bend, 12 feet plus is the current projection. 10 to 15 feet of storm surge is possible. Truly looking like it could be devastating as far as storm surge. And again, the stronger the storm, probably the worse this is going to be. So we have to really hope that there is some land interaction, some things that hold this storm back, because it likely will be at a low end of category 3 if it doesn't get that land interaction, possibly 4 or 5, as we mentioned before. Really nothing holding this one back for rapid development once it's in the Gulf of Mexico. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see any other particular impact graphics or any information about anything else in my videos coming up tomorrow and Thursday, be sure to comment it down below, especially if you live in Florida. I want to cater to what you guys need to know about. So if you have any ideas for that, let me know. With all that being said, please pay attention to the National Hurricane Center. We really ranted about this yesterday, but pay attention to every watch, warning, and advisory. And you can access these graphics that I'm showing in the video on their nhc.noaa.gov website yourself, and they update all the time. So please have that handy, be paying attention to these updates, and please consider evacuating if that is being recommended in your local area. Maybe even if it's not, it might not be a bad idea if you can do it. Of course, I know some people aren't fortunate enough to be able to do that, but if that is something you can do, I would consider thinking about that at this point. Anyway, with all that being said, we do upload every single day, so be sure to subscribe. Again, we will be keeping you guys up to date with this storm until it is all said and done. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.